Boston has a long legacy of racism and discrimination, and a new report digs into the lasting harms still facing the city's black residents. That includes massive discrepancies in wealth, housing, infrastructure, education, and criminal justice, all of which mirror the consequences of systemic racism felt across the United States. In a new report, the National Urban League explores how the state of Black America has and has not changed since the Civil Rights Act of 1964, finding, quote, 60 years later, the fight for equality is far from over. I'm joined now by Rahsaan Hall, President and CEO of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. I'm also joined by Imari Paris Jeffries, Executive Director of Embrace Boston. We're going to talk about their report as well. And Nicole Obi, President and CEO of the Black Economic Council, or BECMA, of Massachusetts. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thanks for having us.
We mentioned the National Urban League report, but Imari, I want to start with the Embrace Boston Harm Report. And I think that it confirms what a lot of folks in this space already know, but maybe a surprise to some people in that we have not come as far as we thought we might have.
Yeah, you know, next year is the anniversary of the 1965 Freedom Rally, where Dr. King and 21,000 people marched from Roxbury to where the Embrace now stands. And so in 1965, those issues that they marched for were education, housing, racial equity, and poverty. And we see years and years later, the state of Black Boston, the state of BIPOC Boston hasn't changed much. And so I think if you ask any person in any major city in America what would be the issues, arguably those four things would be the issues, and I think we could add a few more.
And Nicole, I mean, business, the state of wealth, we talk about housing, infrastructure, things like that. I mean, it seems like the gap is persistent, and there is work being done, though, to change it or close it.
Absolutely. At BECMA, we're very focused on helping to build black wealth, but we know that it's centered very much in addressing some of the issues that the harm report identifies, especially around things like housing in particular, and the long-standing implications that's had on our ability to build wealth.
Yeah. Rahsaan, we talked about the National Urban League report, 60 years, and we're still only have a score of 76%. Now, in my house, that wouldn't be a good grade.
Yeah, that's a little above passing, but and it's important to point out that this index has increased from 73% 2 years ago, but at this rate, Black people would not see parity with white people in this country for 180 years. And so although things have been moving forward in a good direction, we're so far from where they need to be.
Absolutely. You know, Imari, I want to go back to the harm report. Now, using data since 2013, we're talking about young people, and the percent of black students in Massachusetts public schools, 8.7%. Okay, the percent of out-of-school suspensions issued to black students in Massachusetts, 43%. And I think about if we're trying to change some of these generational issues, we're talking about young people. It doesn't seem like we're setting them up for success in our public school system.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things that we attempted to do with the harm report is to talk about how these issues are generational, how the impacts of state-sanctioned racism, how the impacts of slavery has harmed communities of color, black people in particular, generation after generation. And so what was not fixed in the past is not working in the present. Well, what won't work in the present will definitely not work in the future. The harm report outlines 7 of the 8 injury areas: culture, symbols, transportation, housing, education, wealth, health, and climate. And these are the areas that state-sanctioned racism has harmed people of color, and I think they're interrelated. And so I think that was one of the things that we were hoping to set out to really show and demonstrate how these things need to be fixed in order for us to have an inclusive, thriving city.
Absolutely. And Nicole, you know, the Globe actually interviewed one of the owners of the Nubian Square markets that's there. And as a business person, he was like, I need change. I came to this community to make change, but I need help on a federal and on a state level.
Yeah, absolutely. Nubian Market is one of our BECMA members, and so we're really excited about having them in our community and doing the work that they do, bringing fresh food to the community. That's still very rare. And so we want to continue to make sure that we're supporting them and others that are trying to do things to move us in a much more healthy direction, but it's not that easy.
Absolutely. Excuse me, Rahsaan, we have a full screen graphic of the National Urban League's Equality Index. And as we talk about, our young people, folks right now, first calculated in 2005, we talked about this earlier, it aims to show how well Black Americans are doing in comparison to white. So you mentioned the difference between last year and this year, 3%. Roughly. Since 2005, we only have 72.9%. And I was reading how when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the subsequent package of legislation happened, it was able to cut poverty drastically and much faster within 15 years. Whereas now it seems like we're changing drip by drips and drabs here.
Yeah, and that's why legislation is important. That's why federal tax cuts like the child credit is important. That's why making investments for infrastructure and being intentional about directing funds towards communities of color and Black communities in particular to cover the gap are so important. And you look, and the State of Black America report covers these 5 indices: economics, health, education, social justice, and civic engagement. And when we are not doing well in any of these areas, we're not doing well overall. If you can't get up out of bed in the morning and go to work because you're sick, and that may be informed by where you live or the environmental contaminants that you are exposed to or the stress of racism, those are the things that are going to impact the overall wellness and well-being of an entire community.
One thing we've been focused on here at GBH is the conversation around reparations. And in the harm report, Imari, is the need for reparations and a, quote, third reconstruction. So what does that mean? And tell me how we'd use the $14.2 trillion that's recommended by the report to get to that place.
Yeah, well, that's the $1 million question, right? And
or the $1 trillion
the $1 trillion question. And I think this idea of the third reconstruction stems back to this opportunity, this time where there was an emergence of Black elected and civic leaders, followed by legislation, followed by growth, followed by this retraction. And so we saw that first reconstruction happen immediately after the Civil War. Again, civic, elected, emergence, retraction. We saw another second reconstruction happen after the civil rights movement. And some argue after the death of George Floyd, we were in the midst of a third reconstruction. And what we're seeing in the political climate across the country is a part of this retraction stage. This deterioration of DEI, the deterioration of affirmative action, this retraction of equal protections under the law for many marginalized communities. So this is the reconstruction that we're talking about, and the reason we keep calling it a reconstruction because the construction was never finished. And so I think this opportunity with this $1 trillion is a part of that reconstruction. I think the redress is a part of that reconstruction. And when we think about reparations, we tend to draw on William Doherty's concept of ARC. Acknowledgement, redress, and closure. And so this opportunity to acknowledge past wrongs is one of the things that we set out to do with the harm report. You have to acknowledge the things that are wrong before you can go to fixing things. And I think we have a habit as a society to go to fixing things so that we can avoid the conversation. And so we're hoping that this is an opportunity where the conversation can actually occur.
And Rahsaan, the National Urban League report has also called for something similar in terms of an acknowledgement of past wrongs, but also more tangible steps toward closing the gap here in terms of equality with Black Americans and their white counterparts.
Yes, and part of the reason I'm not able to join you all in studio today is because I'm in D.C. right now at the National Urban League's Legislative Policy Conference with the release of the State of Black America report. And the report is special because it does 3 things. One, it looks at our progress since the 1964 Voting Rights Act. It also gives the Equality Index, but then it also does a progress report on the Biden administration. And so to your point, around the intentional efforts to make investments in closing that gap. It looks at some of the progress and promises fulfilled by the Biden administration, but also some of the steps yet to be fulfilled, like eliminating college debt, making sure that voting rights are secure, making sure that there is criminal justice reform. And this is something that's happening at every level of the Urban League, including the local affiliates like the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts.
There's a lot of work being done right here in Greater Boston, and I'm sure we'll have all of you back on the show very soon. Imari Paris Jeffries, Nicole Obi, and Rahsaan Hall, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.